Based on one of the most moving stories from the Gospels of Matthew 9:20,022, Mark 5:25,034, and Luke 8-43,048, this is the journey of a woman marked by pain and exclusion. For 12 years, she lived with an illness that not only weakened her body, but also separated her from others, rendering her invisible in the eyes of society. Yet amidst her suffering, she heard about Jesus, a man unlike any other, known for healing the sick and welcoming those whom no one else would. With a heart full of hope and faith, she made the boldest decision of her life, to touch the hem of Jesus' cloak, believing it would be enough to change her story. This is a tale of faith, courage, and the pursuit of healing not just of the body, but also of the soul. The dawn brought little light to the house where she lived. For 12 years, the woman awoke with the same weight on her body and soul. The incessant flow of blood was not merely an illness, it was a sentence. Each day, she felt her strength draining away, as if her life was being slowly emptied along with the blood that never ceased. She could no longer remember the last time she felt whole. She had forgotten the sound of laughter around her, the warmth of an embrace, the joy of being among people. According to the laws of her land, she was unclean. Her touch defiled, her presence repelled. Neighbors avoided crossing her path, and even children, who once smiled at her, now looked at her with unease. During those years, the woman sought help wherever she could. Physicians took everything she had. First, it was the small dowry left by her parents, then the few possessions she owned. Finally, even what remained of her dignity. In return, they gave her nothing but empty promises and treatments that left her even more debilitated. She lived alone now, isolated, accompanied only by the sound of water pouring from a jar into a basin and the sighs that escaped her lips as she washed her clothes, trying to hide what could not be hidden. This was how life went on, slow, heavy, without hope. One day, as she rested under the shade of a fig tree near the road, she heard excited voices coming from the village. Such commotion was rare. Curious, she approached, but kept the distance she knew others demanded of her. "He's coming this way," said a woman to a group. "The teacher, the one who heals." "Who?" asked a man. "Jesus of Nazareth. They say he healed a leper with just a touch, and some swear he gave sight to a blind man." The woman stepped back, trying to absorb those words. Jesus of Nazareth. She had heard of him. A merchant had told stories about a man who spoke of love, forgiveness, and the kingdom of God. But what most captured her attention were the stories of healing. They said he touched the sick, unafraid of their diseases, and they became clean. That night, while the world around her slept, she sat on her small mat, her eyes fixed on the ceiling of her house. Her mind was filled with thoughts. For 12 years, she had learned not to have expectations. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. But something inside her, something she couldn't explain, made her believe this time might be different. "If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed." The phrase seemed absurd, almost childish, but she couldn't push it from her mind. It wasn't a rational belief. It was a deep faith, like a seed sprouting in the dry soil of her soul. The sun was just rising when she left her house. A cloak covered her face, shielding her from the gaze of those who already knew her as the unclean one. Despite her weakened body, her steps were steady, guided by a strength that did not come from herself. That day, the village was more crowded than usual. Men, women, and children ran in the same direction, eager to see Jesus of Nazareth. It was as if his presence brought a kind of electricity to the air, a promise that something extraordinary was about to happen. She followed the crowd, staying at a distance, watching as people gathered around a simple man with eyes that shone like the sky. "It's him," she thought, her heart racing. Reaching him seemed impossible. With every step she took, more people joined, pressing around Jesus. Some shouted for healing. Others simply wanted to touch him, as if that alone would be enough to absorb some of the power he seemed to carry. She stopped, gasping for breath. The pain in her body reminded her that she was not like other people. She didn't have their strength or their freedom. She knew that if someone recognized her, she could be driven away, perhaps even attacked. But her mind returned to the phrase that had accompanied her since the night before. If I just touch his cloak, I will be healed. It was simple. She didn't need him to look at her or say anything. She just needed a touch. Summoning what remained of her strength, she pushed into the crowd. It was a sea of moving bodies, everyone pressing forward, trying to get closer. For her, every step was a battle. Her vision began to blur and her legs wobbled, but she kept going, guided by that almost irrational faith. She stumbled and fell to her knees. Dust rose around her, and for a moment, she thought she couldn't go on. Then, she lifted her eyes and saw him. Jesus walked slowly, surrounded by a crowd pressing in from all sides. His cloak swayed gently with his movement. He was so close, yet still seemed unreachable. From her knees, she stretched out her trembling hand. The tips of her fingers brushed the edge of Jesus' cloak. It was such a light touch that no one else could have noticed, but to her, it felt as if the world had stopped. A warmth surged through her body, starting in her hand and spreading to every part of her being. The pain vanished. The weakness disappeared. For the first time in 12 years, she felt whole, clean, alive. She drew back, confused and overwhelmed with a joy she couldn't explain. She touched her own body as if to confirm that it was real. But then, something unexpected happened. Jesus stopped abruptly. The hum of the crowd faded until silence fell. His disciples, puzzled, looked at him. "Who touched me?" he asked, his voice firm yet calm. The woman froze. Her heart raced like never before. The joy of her healing gave way to fear. There was no way he could know, she thought. In the midst of such a crowd, hundreds of hands must have brushed against him. Peter, always quick to respond, glanced around and said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you. How can you ask who touched you?" But Jesus didn't seem satisfied. He turned, his gaze searching for something or someone. "I felt power go out from me," he explained. The woman began to tremble. Her plan had been simple: touch the cloak, receive the healing, and disappear into the crowd. She hadn't wanted attention, much less to be exposed. But now, Jesus knew, and he seemed unwilling to move on without an answer. She looked around. No one suspected her yet. She could simply slip away, let Jesus continue on his way. But an inner voice urged her to stay. She realized he wasn't asking out of curiosity. There was something deeper in his words, something that seemed to call her soul into the light. Taking a deep breath, she stood and stepped forward. The crowd's eyes turned to her, and murmurs began to spread. Some people recognized her and stepped back, fearful of touching her. "It was me," she said, her voice barely a whisper but loud enough for Jesus to hear. Then she knelt before him, tears streaming down her face. The words poured out in a chaotic rush as she explained her condition, the suffering she had endured for 12 years, the loneliness, and how she had touched his cloak believing it would heal her. Jesus remained silent as she spoke. When she finished, he knelt to her level. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, she felt something she had never known before. Compassion. "Daughter, your faith has healed you," he said with a gentle smile. "Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." His words echoed like music in her heart. He had not only acknowledged her healing but called her daughter. For 12 years, she had been treated as an outcast, someone without worth. Now, in front of everyone, Jesus claimed her as part of his spiritual family. As he moved on, accompanied by the crowd, she remained there for a few moments, still on her knees, trying to process what had just happened. The physical healing was real, but something far greater had occurred. The weight of shame and rejection she had carried for so long was gone. She stood up, still feeling the gazes of the people around her. But this time, she didn't care. She was no longer the unclean woman. She was someone who had been seen, heard, and loved. With steady steps, she walked back home. No longer the person who had left that morning, but someone who was finally whole. The house seemed different when she returned. It was the same small space with walls worn by time and the same silence that had once felt oppressive. But now, that silence carried a new meaning. For the first time in years, there was no pain, no fear. She walked to the corner where she used to sit to wash her clothes. The jar and bowl were still there, silent witnesses to so many dark days. But now, she no longer needed them in the same way. She touched the jar gently, almost as if bidding farewell to an old companion, and set it aside. As the afternoon passed, her thoughts turned to what had happened, not just the healing, but Jesus' words. "Daughter, your faith has healed you." He hadn't rebuked her for touching him, nor had he allowed others to treat her as unclean. On the contrary, he had called her daughter. That title felt strange, yet so right. It was as though she had been given a new identity, a fresh start. She was no longer the woman with the issue of blood. She was someone with worth, someone who could walk with her head held high. Still, the past didn't fade so easily. She thought of the scornful looks she had endured, the friends who had abandoned her, the doctors who had promised to heal her, but only brought more pain. For so long, these memories had been like an open wound, but now they felt less painful. In the days that followed, rumors about Jesus continued to spread. He had healed others in the village and performed miracles that defied understanding. Some said he was a prophet, while others believed he was the Messiah. She listened to these stories with a heart full of gratitude. It didn't matter exactly who he was. To her, he was the man who saw her when no one else did, the man who gave her life back. But there was something more. Her story began to spread. People whispered about how she had been healed, some with admiration, others with skepticism. Some even came to her, wanting to know more, asking what it was like to touch Jesus, what she felt, and if it was true that she had really been healed. At first, she hesitated to speak. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. But over time, she realized her story held power. It wasn't just about her pain or her healing. It was about the faith that led her to Jesus and what he had done for her. One morning, a young woman knocked on her door. She seemed nervous, almost ashamed. "I've heard about you," the young woman said, avoiding her eyes. I have something that makes me suffer too. I don't know what to do." A lump rose in her throat. For the first time, she saw her own pain reflected in someone else's eyes. She invited the young woman inside and listened patiently, feeling that her own experience had gained a new purpose. Days turned into weeks, and her life found a new rhythm. Although Jesus was no longer in the village, his presence remained alive in her memory through his words and actions. She became a voice for those who, like her, had lived in the shadows, offering comfort and hope. The touch on the hem of his cloak had been the beginning of something far greater than she had imagined. It wasn't just a healing, but a call to live in a new way, no longer defined by pain and exclusion, but by the faith and love Jesus had shown her. The days following her healing brought a mix of peace and newness. She was still adjusting to the freedom of moving about without people avoiding her. She could walk through the market without fearing scornful looks, touch others without the weight of guilt. But the greatest gift was the lightness in her heart. The anguish that had accompanied her for 12 years no longer had a place in her life. Each morning, she gave thanks to God, not just for her physical healing, but for the rediscovery of herself. Her gratitude overflowed in small acts of kindness. She helped her neighbors, shared food with those in need, and whenever someone mentioned Jesus, her eyes lit up. "He gave me my life back," she would say with a sincere smile. People came to her to hear her story. Each time she shared it, she felt more connected to that moment. It wasn't just the memory of a miracle. It was a testimony that the impossible could happen. One day, an elderly man came to see her. He was weary, his shoulders bent under the weight of an illness that had plagued him for years. "I heard you were healed," he said, his voice tinged with cautious hope. How did it happen? She invited him to sit, brought him some water, and shared her story. She spoke of the years of suffering, the shame, the loneliness, and how in an act of faith, she reached out to touch the hem of Jesus' cloak. I didn't know what would happen, she admitted. I just believed he could do something no one else could. The man listened in silence, his eyes brimming with tears. When she finished, he took a deep breath. Do you think he would do the same for me? She smiled. He did it for me. I'm sure he would do it for you too. The visits became frequent. People who once avoided her now sought her counsel, wanting to know more about Jesus. She didn't have all the answers, but shared what she knew her encounter with him, his words, and the profound impact he had on her life. Gradually, she realized her healing had a greater purpose. It wasn't just about her, it was about inspiring others to have the same faith. He's not here anymore, but his love and power remain. She told those who came to her, all he asks is that we have faith. Time passed, but her story was not forgotten. Children listened with wide eyes, neighbors repeated her words, and even strangers traveled to meet her. The simple act of touching Jesus' cloak became a symbol of hope for many. And as she lived out the rest of her days, she did so with the certainty that her testimony was not only about her healing, but about the power of faith that had transformed her life. Thank you for following this moving story. If it inspired you, feel free to like and share it with others who might need a message of faith and hope. Don't forget to subscribe to continue receiving content like this. Let's spread this inspiration together. What part touched your heart the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.